Welcome. It's time. It's time to drop in, open up, and receive. It's time to remember. It's time to believe. Let's elicit the beautiful, the good, and the true. It's time for me. It's time for you. Hello, and welcome to the channel. I'm your girl, Jillian Melissa, and welcome to an opportunity to drop into your heart and connect to divinity. For those of you who are first-time listeners, I'm so blessed that you are here. And for returning listeners, welcome back. Also blessed. So excited to be in this co-creative space together. And the more that the audience grows and takes shape, the more I feel into who you are, the more I can specifically channel episodes for you. I actually just had an exploratory session about an hour ago with someone who found me through the first podcast episode and connected to some of what I shared. And now I'll be working with her privately. So this podcast is already taking on a life of its own. I feel so grateful, and I am so ready to continue to support you in whatever you need. Today, I really wanted to dive into the higher self, how my higher self has shown up for me, what she does for me, and perhaps get into a little bit of some of the origins of some of my psychic senses. So I know in the last episode, I talked about the grand overstory of how I developed my intuition, or a sense of knowing around my intuitive gifts. But what those intuitive gifts look like in the practical, tangible, how I use them in my everyday life, how they dictate my decisions, I want to start to get into some of that nitty-gritty. And hopefully it will support you in further honing your own intuitive gifts, or at least opening up to the possibility that maybe some of the things that you're sensing, whether it's a smell in the air, a taste on your tongue, a thought in your mind, a deep knowing in your bones, might actually be divine guidance and not just a 3D or egoic interpretation of your reality. So what is the higher self? The higher self, capital H, capital S, some use synonymously with soul. I think there's a little bit of a distinction, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use them interchangeably. That is the aspect of us that is connected to the all, connected to all that is, all that ever will be, and divinity. When your higher self descends to earth, the light of your soul manifests as a body through the biological DNA of your human ancestry. I believe all souls consciously choose their parents, their environments that they grow up in. That can be controversial to some, especially those who have endured childhood trauma. I remain fervent and firm in my belief that we all choose that before we incarnate. Connecting to the higher self and then allowing the higher self to be the main operating system of our reality is a huge part of a spiritual awakening. You're going to hear me use the term ego a lot if you continue listening. And often when I say, that's your ego to somebody, it can sound like or to myself, frankly, that's your ego, Jillian. It can sound like I'm attempting to be offensive, or that I'm articulating that this person is too prideful, too boastful, conceited. That is not at all what I mean. Ego refers to the conscious conception of self. So when I'm referring to my ego, I'm referring to the narrative that I have. I am Jillian Melissa Lubetkin. Maybe that last name will change sometime in the next decade. I have brown, curly, frizzy hair that I prefer to wear blown out, and I grew up in New Jersey, and, insert all the biographical facts, insert my preferences. I love chocolate chip cookie dough and massages and looking at the stars, and insert all of my trauma too, and insert my ancestry. That's ego, conscious conception of self, who I think I am, and how I move through the world. It's my personality. Often at the start of a spiritual journey, we are asked to sacrifice the ego in some way, and you've probably heard the term ego death. People have varying definitions of what that means, but generally something will happen where you feel a demolition of some aspect of your reality. Maybe you're going through a divorce, maybe there's a death, maybe the business that you launched completely fails. There is a death of some aspect of self, and often we are asked or required to sacrifice our ego in favor of the soul. Putting on a little lip gloss, my lips needed some lube for that. We are often asked to sacrifice the ego in order to connect to the higher self, to hear the wisdom of the capital S self, the soul, the part of us that is connected to God, to the angels, and to our divine path, what we're actually here to do, our true mission, how we're actually supposed to be of service, and to really awaken the heart. Then there comes a point in the spiritual journey where we have to learn how to integrate the ego. We can't just move our ego out of the way and pretend it's not there. As anyone who's done any sort of shadow work with me knows, anything that we try to ignore or suppress or repress just grows. We are humans. We have brains. I'm always going to have a personality. I'm probably always going to think my name is Jillian. I'm always going to know I grew up in New Jersey. All of those aspects of me are beautiful, and I want to celebrate them. The question becomes, when does my ego interfere? When is my ego at odds with my soul? When is my ego desire not in accordance with divinity, with my higher self? So how do we cultivate that relationship to our higher self, to that spark of soul, that aspect of spirit that lives in all of us? Well, the first thing is, it's really important to understand that we all have a higher self. Whether or not you believe this is so, it is so. And that might be a really hot take. It's just true. Similar to gravity, you can say that gravity doesn't exist. You can choose to believe that gravity is not a real physical phenomenon. Simultaneously, the arms of gravity are going to impact you. You drop an apple, it's going to fall. So you can believe whatever you want to believe, and I understand this is just my belief system, and many may argue that I don't have proof, although I will argue right back, although I probably won't argue, I will just smile and nod. Proof abounds. This is real regardless of whether you choose to opt into the belief. Now, opting into the belief makes the journey a lot less painful and a lot more exquisite. So how do we connect to that aspect of self? Well, sometimes the higher self will assert him or herself, will assert itself. And gender is not super important right now. In spiritual science, more of the Rudolf Steiner Christian mysticism stream, many believe that if you've incarnated in a female body, your higher self is male. And if you've incarnated in a male body, your higher self is female. Not sure how much I resonate with that, although I do identify as a twin flame, and so that complicates things a little bit in terms of what aspects of a soulscape I'm tapping into, as I believe I and my divine masculine counterpart share one soul essence. But generally, when I'm working with clients, we gender the higher self the same as the soul. So that's the languaging I'm going to use for today. Don't cancel me, or do if you want. But my higher self, I speak of using female pronouns, and that's what I'm going to do. So my higher self has asserted herself in my life prior to me even having any conscious conception of higher self. Before awakening truly to my intuitive gifts in a conscious way, before studying and training, my higher self asserted herself in my reality. So I'm going to describe that with a little anecdote, because why not? Because that's what we're doing here. As I shared in the previous episode, I had the miraculous privilege of attending Sierra Tucson rehab to get off fentanyl. How did I land there, though? Right? I was on the fentanyl for 2 years, and oh my gosh, I was hella addicted. And I was fading in and out of consciousness. I remember my mother took me to a pain psychotherapist, someone who specialized in helping individuals who struggle with physical pain find relief. What a great idea. What a great concept. She used talk therapy and biofeedback and some other modalities. The first time I saw her, she told me she didn't think she'd be able to work with me because I was nodding in and out of consciousness. I was so fucked up on the fentanyl. I wound up working with her for quite some time. And when I made the decision that I needed to get off the fentanyl, first and foremost, that was my higher self. That was not my ego. That was not the conscious conception of Jillian. I was completely lost to the demonic energy of that medication that was prescribed to me. And my ego just wanted more of it and more of it and more of it and more of it, and it's all I wanted. But something awoke within me, a light within me that just spoke, you have to get off. That was my higher self. That was my soul. It's an intervening energy when we have veered way too far off the path. You can sometimes hear it as a direct voice. Sometimes it's a knowing, a feeling. But it was that higher self aspect that decided, Jillian, your pain is not getting better. You have to get off this medication. Now, I went to that pain therapist, Dr. Sangeeta Nayak, and my doctor who had prescribed that medication, Dr. Malanga, and I told them of my aspirations to get off the fentanyl. And they were like, whoa, nobody's ever asked to get off this medication yet. So I was like, well, what's the plan? What do we do? And we made, I think it was 6 to 8 months of, slowly titrating off. But then Dr. Malanga told me that I had to go to some sort of center or hospital to fully come off it. So like once I was at the lowest possible dose, then I needed to go to some facility to get off the fentanyl fully, because if I didn't, I could risk a stroke or a seizure or fill in the blank with another horrific thing. So I asked, okay, great, where do I go? And he had not a single recommendation. So then I went over to Dr. Nayak, my therapist, and complained to her, I can't believe the doctor doesn't have a recommendation. Where should I go? You know, right? You help people with pain, and I imagine you got to have some addicts in here, or people who are taking narcotics. We talk about this all the time, how, you should only be on opiates, she was describing. You should only be on them if they're improving your quality of life and your functionality. And my functionality was non-existent. I was just like melting, watching TV shows and listening to audiobooks, but doing nothing. And so she had a lot of experience with people on heavy-duty painkillers, and she also had not a single place to recommend. No rehab, hospital, detox, nothing. So I remember leaving that session for a second feeling a vacancy and then just a spark of clarity. You can research this, Jillian. And so I sat at my desktop computer at the time and I researched and I put together a beautiful pamphlet, which I showed my mother and father, and which now Dr. Nayak uses with her patients as a reference guide. But I put together basically a manual of all the options, not all the options, I think it only had like 7, but all the options that I found that seemed accessible and quality of places where you can go to detox off of pain medication, and how many weeks the programs were and what they offered. This one has hydrotherapy, this one has personal training, this one does hypnotherapy, this one does whatever else, this one has equine therapy. And I presented this information to my parents, and the price points and all of this I had researched and compiled myself, which looking back feels like a stroke of genius, how I was able to do all of that on that much fentanyl. That was my higher self moving through me. That was channeled. That was spirit saying, it's time to wake up from this slumber. It's time to get out of this. And yes, of course, my egoic mind, my conscious self was the one sitting there typing and Googling and then calling up the place and asking, how much do you cost and how do I get in and what's the process? Yes, my humanity is involved, of course, but it is the aspect of divinity that was compelling me to make those calls, to sit on my computer, to present this information to my parents. And it was my intuition that chose Sierra Tucson of all those choices. Our intuition is the language that our higher self speaks. Our higher self, the soul self, is the interface between the material realm and divinity. It is the vehicle. It's the transponder, it's the transmitter. And the language that the higher self speaks is intuition. The intuitive senses, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairgustance, clairolfaction, all of that, that's the specific lexicon of the higher self. So when you hear people talking about those psychic gifts, all those clairs, it refers to clear fill in the blank, like clairgustance is clear tasting. When you actually get a taste in your mouth, that signifies some sort of psychic knowing or energy or entity or being. When people discuss their clairs, that perceptive capacity comes from and with the higher self. The more that we align with our higher self, the more that our life can just become that moving prayer. Our life can just be an expression of divinity rather than veering off course and having to be thrust back on. Oh, hello, Bubbles. Bubbles just woke up. Our higher self will wake us up from a slumber of demonic energy, of manipulation, of control, of ego. It's okay, baby. How we communicate with our higher self and understand what the soul aspect of us needs, wants, craves, desires, etc., is through our psychic senses, through all of those clairs. So a lot of people think psychic skills are just a party trick. Like, ooh, can you tell what I'm thinking? Ooh, can you predict the future? And it's like, sure, perhaps. Predicting the future is a whole interesting topic because we also co-create our future. And particularly with the pandemic, I was receiving a lot of visions about what was coming down the pipeline, but was guided not to speak about it on any platform whatsoever because I didn't want to feed fear or certain timelines. The second you put a thought in someone's mind, you can't ever unhear something, right? I think about my fourth grade music teacher, Mrs. Plasner, telling me that I could no longer be the star of our school plays because it was a musical and I was tone deaf. And I was shattered. I never forgot that someone told me I was tone deaf. Years later in college, I found out I had perfect pitch. And I was like, what the actual fuck, Mrs. Plasner? You know, these things that people say to us, even if you know that someone's not telling the truth or they're just being unkind or it's their own ego projection, it's really hard to forget. Really hard to forget. So in terms of predictions, I generally choose not to employ my intuition in a predictive capacity on a global scale unless I feel like I can deliver messages totally from a love-based place, which is often next to impossible because you cannot control how somebody interprets. So if I were to talk about what I think is going to happen with the banking systems or an energy forecast for the next big fear programming manipulation tactic that's coming through, you know, it's just very hard to maintain neutrality and ensure that everyone retains their sovereignty. But I have gotten a lot of requests for energy forecasts, so I will continue to feel into that. That's not for today. The point is, psychic skills are not just party tricks. Right, Bubbles? It's not just a party trick, my man. I hear ya. It's how we talk to our higher self. It's how we talk to divinity in both directions. So if you're looking to communicate with divinity, God, spirit, source, light, love, unity consciousness, whatever languaging you crave to use, the psychic skills are how we do it. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the specific clairs and how they've shown up in my life. Perhaps this can be an opening for you. So the first one has to do with complaining energy. So this seems very simple, and like, why would this be that helpful to have a psychic sense that tells you when somebody is really a complainer? But I can't tell you the amount of times that it's come in handy. So this also connects to my experience at Sierra Tucson. When I arrived there, I was actually really excited. I was high as a kite on the fentanyl. And they first put you in a hospital component that they call Desert Flower Hospital. Oh, Bubba, don't eat my hand. Let me get you a chew toy that's better tasting than my hand. This tastes like beef, which is much better than epidermis. Okay. So, my man, Bubbles, is very vocal. So I'm in Desert Flower Hospital, which sounds really lovely and flowery. But everyone who was there, all of the patients, called it the tank. And that's really what it felt like. You're quarantined in this component of the rehab facility until they deem you ready to join the community. And then you get to be in your lodging, Morning Star, or whatever the other ones were called. I was in Morning Star, so that's the only one I remember. You get assigned your room and your bed and get to join all the programming, the group therapy, etc. But before you can actually be a part of the group and eat at the cafeteria and do all the activities, they keep you in this detox center. Most people are there for about 48 hours, I was told. I was there for 10 days. I was vibrant and excited and high. When I got there, I saw people in the living room type of area. It was like a living room with a TV and some board games, and then these different hospital rooms that had like styrofoam beds and sandpaper blankets, and yeah. Did we even have showers in there? I don't remember showering the whole time I was in there, but I imagine there had to be a shower. Anyway, okay, not the point. Or is it? So they rip off my fentanyl patch, the transdermal that I've had on for the last 2 years. I've already taken my final spray, so I have no more sprays of sepsis. And for about an hour, I'm okay. And then I start to feel the worst I've ever felt in my whole life. And those 10 days were torturous. And if anyone's ever seen the John C. Reilly movie, Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, there's a scene where he is withdrawing from whatever drugs he's on at that point in the movie. And they have a nurse with the white hat, the old-timey nurse, and he's like shivering and he's, oh, I'm cold, I need more blankets. And so the nurse is like, doctor, he needs more blankets. And then he's like, I'm so hot, I need less blankets. Doctor, he needs less blankets. And he's like, I need more blankets and I need less blankets. Like, that's how it felt. It's the only way I can describe how it felt withdrawing from the fentanyl. I felt like I was so hot and so cold at the same time. Again, in and out of consciousness, felt like I was dying. Thank God my roommate, Ruthie, at the time, saved my life multiple times. she would get, we'd be alone in the room with the door shut with no nurse or anyone there. And then she would see something wrong happening with me and get a nurse. And I really do think saved my life. And unfortunately, Ruthie did not, she's no longer alive. And her addictions took over. Man. But I'm just so grateful for her angelic presence in my life, and I miss you, Ruthie, and I love you. So in Desert Flower Hospital, we were not allowed outside except for smoke breaks. And this is getting back to the psychic knowing that I receive when I'm around complainers. So thank you for bearing with me in this narrative. So most of the people who were at this rehab were chain smokers, and they had smoking areas throughout the rehab where you were allowed to smoke. Interestingly, cigarettes are really encouraged in rehab. I actually smoked a cigarette in rehab, and I was not a smoker. But that was more of like a social, anyway, story for another day. They let the individuals in the Desert Flower Hospital outside for quote unquote fresh air only to smoke, only for these 10-minute smoke breaks. So when you got there, they asked who was a smoker. And then at the allotted smoke break times, let's say 11:45 and 3:15, they gathered the smokers and let them go outside and sit in this little smoking tent area and smoke their cigarettes. Now, I had said I was not a smoker, so they did not call on me to go outside, and all I wanted was fresh air. All I wanted was fresh air. And so I was begging and pleading, please let me outside. Like, this is prison. This is not what I signed up for. I'm here of free will. I'm trying to get off the fentanyl. And granted, I had turned down Suboxone and methadone and all the other medications that they were recommending to help ease the transition. So I was just like cold turkey vibes, fucked up. Eventually, I got them to add me to the smoking list, and so I was allowed to go outside. And I'll never forget that first time I was outside, all I wanted was fresh air, and all I could smell was cigarette smoke, which I think is like the most repulsive smell. I hate the smell of cigarette smoke. It feels hard to breathe. It feels stifling, constrictive, heavy, like smog. I just despise it. And I remember being so angry, and all I wanted to do was complain. They had a little payphone. I called my mom a bunch in there until they stopped allowing me to do that. I don't even remember if I complained about this or not to her. My memories from that first week are fuzzy. I have very, specific flashes, but I do remember how infuriated I was. And so I think it was like the third day where they let me out with the smokers. I tried to walk like 5 feet away from all the smokers just to get a little bit more fresh air, and they would not let me. And they called me back as if on a leash. And so that was really awakening on a lot of levels. Somehow my system imprinted cigarette smoke scent, the smell of cigarette smoke with complaining energy. So now my clairolfaction or clairaudience, and that's clear smelling. So that refers to you smell something that is giving you psychic data. This is one of the least talked about clairs. But when I meet somebody, right, Bubbles? When I meet somebody who is only going to be complaining at me, I will smell cigarette smoke. This is an incredible asset to me. It may seem not that significant, but as somebody who spends a lot of her time in sessions with people, listening to them share their complaints, and I feel honored and privileged to be able to do so and to hold loving space. Sometimes in my personal life, let's just say I'm out at a party, I don't want to have somebody complain at me for an hour. I find it really off-putting and not enjoyable. So if I can walk around a room and around a particular person, I'm smelling cigarette smoke, I know, okay, this person's really stuck in a complaining energy right now, or they have the intention, whether conscious or unwitting, to complain at me, and often I'll just avoid them. It's funny, I remember one time I went to a gathering and I thought everyone there was actually smoking. I hadn't yet honed the gift enough to really discern when is there actually cigarette smoke in the space and when is it my psychic smell, which now I'm much better at doing, although every once in a while I do get fooled. But that's an incredibly beautiful gift that spirit has afforded me. Now, by tapping into my psychic scent, I have a way to discern who I want to engage with. That's just one example. And I do believe for me, cigarette smoke was the scent selected because of my past experience and the trauma of feeling trapped in that Sierra Tucson tank and finally getting let out only to be suffocated by the cigarette smell. And I was in such complaint energy. This is bullshit. This is not fair. I was really wanting to complain. And I was complaining quite a bit. Ask any of the technicians there, and they will support that reality. When we communicate with our higher self through our psychic gifts, or rather when our higher self communicates to us, we are able to receive data and make choices that are more in line with divinity. I'll give you another example regarding my clairaudience, my psychic hearing. So prior to living in Austin, I was living in beautiful Carlsbad, California, North County, San Diego, sweet spot of the universe, my little paradise, and I absolutely loved being there. Now, my lease was coming to a conclusion, and although I absolutely loved my home and my outdoor shower and all the rainbows I saw in that little magical one bedroom every single day, and I loved being blocks from the beach and blocks from my best friend, Erica Eckel, I couldn't renew because they were doing construction on both sides of the property. It was so loud, it was so abrasive, and next to impossible to do my intuitive sessions, and I just knew it was time to get out of the space. So my ego, right, back to conscious conception of self, my personality was like, okay, absolutely want to stay in this area. I had lived in Los Angeles for 4 years, and when I felt like Los Angeles ejected me and I was no longer needed in Los Angeles, I spent about 10 months being nomadic. And it was when I landed in that Oceanside, Encinitas, Carlsbad area that I was like, this is home. I was getting a lot of signs and synchronicities about Carlsbad, and eventually it became my home. And it felt like home, and I wanted it to remain my home. On an ego level, I was very attached to Carlsbad. I was attached to the pristine beaches and the perfect weather and my San Diego dance class and my friend. I was going to say friends, but I didn't really have a lot of friends there. I had my singular friend. I had a few friends. I should be kind. But I was super attached and desiring to stay. So my ego did what my ego does, which is work her butt off to try to make something happen. So I was on all the hot pads and Trulia and apartments.coms and going to listings, and I kept getting blocked. I would apply for a place, as would 55 other people. It's a super desirable area. Never was chosen. And at a certain point, I intuitively heard, now this is my clairaudience, stop the search. We will hand you your next home on a silver platter. So I listened. And some may say that's a crazy thing to do. I was weeks away from my lease ending and having nowhere to live, but I trust my guidance. And at this point in my journey, I know when my guidance is my guidance and what happens when you don't trust it, which is nothing good. Your guidance is always there to serve you. Your higher self always wants the best for you. That energy is leading you towards, again, what many call your highest timeline, your truest expression, your most abundance, your true love, your greatest joy, your divine mission. That's what your higher self wants for you. Now, my ego wanted Carlsbad. Actually, my ego would have been very happy with a beautiful bungalow in Encinitas or a gorgeous house in Oceanside. But North County, San Diego was my ego's desire, and my ego was really strong about that. But my higher self indicated through clairaudience, through the psychic skill of psychic hearing, I intuitively heard to stop the search. Now, people ask about clairaudience. Is it actually is it like you're hearing a human voice? Is it like the voice of your father or your brother? Does it feel like a voice within your own mind? Different people perceive that psychic hearing differently, but it's certainly not as loud and tangible as the voice you're hearing from me right now. But it is still a heard sensation and perception. And that's why, psychics can be called crazy. What's the line between schizophrenia and hearing voices and hearing something in a psychic way and being a very sane and grounded person? I will dive more into that in a subsequent episode because that is one of my favorite topics: mental health or unhealth, dis-ease, and spiritual gifts, the overlap, where one starts and stops, how to tell the difference, all of that. That's not for today. So like I said, I heard to stop the search and just kept living my life. Then one Monday night, right outside of San Diego Dance Works, my 8 p.m. Monday night hip hop class, warming up, and I heard again, clairaudience, go on Facebook, go to the group Yes Nomads, which was a Facebook group I was a part of, still am. That is similar to an Airbnb type of vibe. It is a curated group. There is a small buy-in, and people offer up their fully furnished homes to digital nomads or travelers. Hey, I'm going to be in Europe for the month. Who wants to stay at my place? Blah, blah, blah. So I heard, go to Yes Nomads, find the place with the baby grand piano. That's your new home. So I scrolled down about 5 posts on my phone right before, it's like 7:58, class is starting at 8 o'clock. I see a home picture, I see pictures of this place, and my heart just flutters. I get my resounding yes signs, also my clairvoyant yes. I often use clairvoyant testing where I will imagine a rose in my third eye and a yes, a resounding yes. The rose blooms and blossoms and grows, and a no, if something is not aligned, the rose wilts and withers and dies. And I just saw the rose petals like exploding. I felt this orgasmic warm wave. Yes, yes, yes. So I immediately messaged the person who created that post without even looking what state or city or even country this place was in. I just knew this is my spot. Then my ego started making a little stipulation because I felt I wasn't going to be super happy with the location. And my ego then came in and said, if this person responds before dance class is over, like within the next hour, you have to move there no matter what. And I think I actually waited a few days before I even checked what city it was in. And it was Austin, Texas. And I threw a little bit of a tantrum. I was like, Texas? The F? I don't want to go to fucking Texas. What? Like be landlocked? Ugh. And I had also had a not so great experience in Austin just a few months before. The only other time I'd ever been to Austin. I had a really challenging time with my perceived twin flame. Again, stories for another day, but I will absolutely be diving into the twin flame narrative, both that it is expressed on social media and in the spiritual communities, the New Age community, and what I believe the truth of the journey is and how I teach it. There's also a lot more teachings in my Patreon community for twin flames for those who are intrigued by that aspect of my journey. Anyway, I moved here. And I fully followed that clairaudient coupled with the then clairvoyant and even clairsentient, right? That psychic sensing, that yes in my body to move here, despite my ego's desires, in the face of my ego's desires. My ego wanted to stay in Carlsbad, yet my soul said, you have to come to Austin. And at the time, I didn't know why. And that's the thing. Our ego will want explanations and understandings and reasons. And often the reasons our ego comes up with make a whole lot of sense, right? Like, it would make sense for me to stay in North County, San Diego. All my stuff is here. My life is here. It's logical. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to uproot my life, pack up my car, ship it to Texas, don't know anyone who lives in Austin except one person I met at a conference in Miami the year before, and just start a whole new life. But my soul said that's what I had to do. Now, a year and however many months later, we're in March, a year and 6 months, wow. Okay, I'm like November, December, January, February, March, carry the 4, X minus 2. A year and 5 months later, my ego can create stories about why I thought or think maybe my soul brought me here. My twin moved in with me a few months after I moved here. And what's also really fun, just a fun fact, the way spirit works. So this place, the photos that were posted on social media made it look like this was a 1-bedroom. There was the photos of the living room and kitchen, which is over there. I don't need to give you the whole MTV Cribs tour right now, but then there was photos of the bathroom, the master bathroom, gorgeous, massive bathtub. That really got me jazzed. Bedroom, cool. And then they showed a desk in like a corner and the patio. But I thought that was just all on one floor, and I thought the desk must be in some corner of the living room here. The first night I got here, there was a staircase. I'm like unpacking my things. I'm flabbergasted because it's Halloween night, so kids are coming up trick-or-treating. I just got off the plane. I couldn't figure out the key code, so I'm locked out of the house trying to punch in the numbers, texting the owner. It's not working. I'm like, holy shit, did I just get here? My car wasn't here yet, which had most of my stuff in it. I just had like a carry-on. I'm flailing outside as these little kids in costumes are coming up asking me for candy. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And then I get into the house. I start trying to nest. I'm getting excited. I'm noticing, oh my God, there are all these crystals here. There are all these fun things. Oh my gosh, look how high the ceilings are. Like really just taking in the home, which was not well advertised. And then I see a staircase. And then I realize there are these extra bedrooms upstairs. There's a little gym. There's an office space. There's a guest room. There's a den. And I was like, I have like a bonus house. This is wild. And that's, felt like a gift from spirit, a gift from the divine. Here you go. Like for trusting your intuition, we will give you a whole extra floor. And it also worked out beautifully when the aforementioned man I perceive as my twin flame came to live with me. We were not sharing a bedroom, so he had his own space. And that was really divinely orchestrated for me to have a home where he could come and feel more like a roommate. Not even a roommate, a housemate. So again, my ego can confabulate 2020 hindsight, make up reasons. Oh, I was guided to Austin because this is where I was meant to ground in my twin flame union. Or, oh, I even started trying to come up with reasons. I remember going out with Erica and her boyfriend at the time, Brian, talking about my move to Austin. And I was like, maybe it's because, being by the ocean is too stirring and activating. And I need to go somewhere to actually ground in my podcast and ground in my book and be more I was coming up with trying to make it make sense. And to be honest, what's so beautiful about the mystery of spirit is that sometimes we just won't fully know. We can try to connect the dots. We can create a beautiful narrative looking back, but I don't think we'll ever truly understand the complexity of why we're guided and how we're guided and where we're guided. And so I can't claim to fully understand why I'm in Austin. And in fact, the lease term that I initially agreed to was 4 months. And I thought it was going to be like a semester abroad. I go to Austin, I do whatever I'm supposed to do here, wear some cowgirl boots, do some line dancing, eat some barbecue, and head right on back to my home base in Carlsbad. But the guidance has been to stay and to stay and to stay. And so I heed the guidance. So your higher self can impact literally every aspect of your life. And some individuals will only feel a connection to the higher self in those really dark night of the soul moments, like I was describing before, when I had fallen prey to the fentanyl, and eventually my higher self came alive and said, no, Jillian, get off this, reclaim your life. I wasn't using clairvoyance or clairaudience or any sort of advanced psychic skills or rudimentary psychic skills, but there was just this soul shaking. Sometimes that's all people will experience in regards to their soul or higher self. However, the more consciously connected we can be to our higher self, the more we can get precise data, like move here, literally rent this apartment or whatever it is, right? And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of faith to trust your higher self to make those types of major life decisions. But I wouldn't have it any other way. And even though there are often moments where my ego will be frustrated, my soul is at peace. And my ego is learning, and it's a continual evolution. I can't promise to have it. I can't say that I've mastered it. It's definitely a continued integration. But I do feel more embodied than ever. I do feel like my higher self is me, that I have become the walking embodiment of my higher self. Rather than, I would say 3 years ago, I used to have to call up my higher self using psychic skills or drop into a channeling space and then channel guidance. Higher self, what would you have me do? Or do a guided meditation where I'm imagining my higher self and she's this beautiful version of me with longer, luscious hair and a perfect tan and she's glowing and radiating. And I had this image of her, and many people in spiritual communities create this sort of perfection narrative around the higher self is the perfect version of me, but then they just thrust all of this egoic stuff, like my higher self is fit and she's pretty and she has whiter teeth and this and that. Like, that's not it. It's not just, hey, let's connect to higher self to get all of our ego desires. That will lead you down a very luciferic path. That will lead you to distortion, and that will lead you to receiving false guidance. I've seen it happen a lot of times. It's not pretty. In the past, I had to call up my higher self, whether through a meditation, through channeling, and ask her what she wanted of me. And now it feels more like the inverse. It feels like I am mostly, more of the time, operating from a higher self place. And every once in a while, my ego calls. My ego tugs at me. And then I have to really drop in and give my ego that space to share what she needs to share and make sure that I'm not self-abandoning or self-sacrificing just to live this divine life in a way where I'm not fully meeting the needs of my ego. Because like I said earlier, we do need a healthy, integrated ego. I could go on and on and on sharing stories about how my psychic gifts, the language of my soul, have beautifully and brilliantly impacted my life. And my aim is to continue to sprinkle those stories in upcoming episodes so you get more of a taste and a feel of different ways your own intuition can guide your reality. One thing I know to be true is that your intuition will always guide you home. Your intuition will always guide you to love, to light, to healing. Your ego isn't as trustworthy. Your ego sometimes might lead you to healing, sometimes might lead you to true love if you're really, really lucky. But more often than not, your ego will lead you to distortion, to manipulation, to lack and scarcity, and making fear-based choices. A lot of people ask me how you tell the difference between fear and intuition. And to me, they are so wildly different that it actually took me a long time to figure out how to teach that to my students, because I was like, what? They feel so vastly different to me. Intuition feels calm and steadfast and spacious. Ego is anxious and fear-based. It's kind of more, it vibrates, it shakes. And egoic guidance often is repetitive. It's poking. It's, come on, go do this thing, go do this thing, go do this thing. Come on, come on, come on. It will have a time scarcity element. If you ever feel like you're being rushed, that is never your intuition. So I really invite you to consider, as we start to conclude for today, do I have a connection with my soul, with my higher self? How do I conceive of that aspect of me? Do I have this materialistic, sort of personified, perfectionistic image? Do I feel I have a truthful connection? Do I dialogue with my soul or higher self? And if I don't, do I desire to? Do I desire to build that connection, to facilitate that relationship? Am I allowing my psychic gifts to be what they are, truly gifts? To again, let them be the compass and the flashlight that guides me to my best reality. And the best reality might not be what your ego had in mind. The divine dazzles in ways that our ego cannot even predict. I hope you receive this as an invitation to continue to connect with your higher self and your soul. I will continue to talk more about how to do that and what that looks like. Until then, sending you so much love. I hope you continue to remember that grace is the sanctuary of space from which quantum solutions arise. And please continue to afford yourself grace. I love you. Thank you so much for tuning in to It's Time with Jillian Melissa. If you're feeling like it's time to leave that toxic relationship, launch that business, share your voice with the world, if you're feeling like it's time for whatever it probably is, so I invite you to trust your intuitive compass. And if you're feeling like it's time to connect with me, I invite you to follow me on Instagram at JillianMelissa_intuition. That's really the hub of all my content, and using the link in bio, my link tree, you can access links to book a private session with me. You can join my monthly membership community through Patreon. I post upcoming workshops, group channeling classes, intuitive guidance gatherings, and much more. So that's really the best way to stay connected with my energy. My hope is that you bestow love on all those who cross your path. And until we meet again, I love you.